The Nikon 24-200 is a really underrated lens for landscape photographers, and it's just a really underrated lens for the Nikon Z system as a whole. And that is the question we're answering in this video. Is this a solid lens for landscape photographers? Here's my first impressions and first look at this lens for landscape photography. So let's get right to it. What's up guys, it is the Project Photography back in the video, and today we are back in the Los Angeles National Forest as always, as where I shoot most of these POV stuff, and we are doing a first impressions review, not a review, but a first impressions of the 24-200 for landscape photographers. Now this is quite an odd lens for landscape photography. This is not something that you would considerably think about when going out and shooting landscape photography. You would think something like a 14-30, a 70-200 even, and adaptive lenses would be better for landscape photography than this lens. This is a really interesting pick on my part. But the reason why I'm getting this is because I'm replacing this lens to the Nikon Z50 and the 50-250. This is replacing that kit right there as the lightweight telephoto. And the next part I'm going to be doing is talking about what my first impression concerns are for this lens. So let's talk about what my concerns are in the next part. So guys, when I first bought this camera, I did have a few concerns. We'll call it concerns because those are things I thought about when I actually was ordering and buying this lens. One of those main concerns was, how is the image quality going to actually be? Now, this honestly isn't a huge concern, but traditionally speaking, lenses that were wide and then went to something like a telephoto range, like a 24-200 like this lens, or a 20-300 that Nikon has, have traditionally not had great image quality because you have so much glass, such a small package. There's going to be a lot of issues optically speaking. Now, this is something I'm not really having a huge concern over because literally every single Nikon Z lens that I've used has been absolutely incredible so far. And I'm pretty confident that this lens will just be as great optically as the rest. Now, the other concern I have that is actually much more of a pressing issue is the fact that this lens only goes to 200mm on the long range. Literally my entire photography career, literally 6 years now, all the telephoto camera lenses that I've used up until this point have had at least 300mm on the long end, and this only goes to 200. So the biggest question that I'm gonna have is 200 enough for my telephoto needs? If I feel like it's too constrained, then that's definitely gonna be an issue and something I'm gonna have to really consider moving forward from this lens. And the best way to figure out if that's going to be enough or not is by actually going out and shooting, which is what we're doing in today's episode. So what we're doing is a POV, sort of point of view, where I'm gonna have you guys on my GoPro to get a first-person point of view of me actually shooting landscape photography. And I think that's the best way to really do a true first impression because this is my first shoot with this lens. I'm giving my real thoughts in real time. Then after, me going back to my place and actually talking about my first impressions of this lens, of using it for the first time. Alright guys, it is officially now about 30 minutes before sunset, and I think right now is a good time to actually start getting some POV landscape photography. And what I'm doing is showing you guys on my GoPro to get a first person point of view of me actually shooting with the 24-200. Really excited to be getting some solid photos. And look, the lighting is actually pretty decent. I don't know if you can see that, but the lighting is actually pretty decent. Gonna be excited to actually shoot some photos. So yeah, let's get right into the video, do some POV landscape photography. What's up y'all, we're now behind the scenes, behind the camera. And let's talk a little bit about this lens and just what I'm doing, my thought process and all that for actually being on this shoot. So what we're actually doing with this shoot is driving around these kind of cliff sides and seeing where we can find nice areas to shoot outside, heading towards kind of the ravine and all that sort of good stuff. Right here, what we're doing is taking 5 photos at different exposures to create an HDR image to capture as much dynamic range as possible. So you see right here, I've taken my 5 exposures and the end result comes out to something like this. Now, this is the fully edited photo, and as you can see here, there's some great dynamic range in this photo. We'll be preserving those highlights, and we're also bringing back up those shadows with minimal noise and lots of detail. So that is kind of the goal of HDR, and that's kind of what I shoot a lot with, especially with my telephoto lenses. So yeah, let's keep on going here. So at this point, let's see what a vertical orientation looks like right here. And we're gonna be doing the sort of the same thing again, like getting that HDR look. But sometimes you just want to shoot in that vertical orientation just to get a different look, see what works, what doesn't. And in this photo, I feel like the lines with the mountainside don't really work, so don't really use it. But I think it's a good idea to just get different perspectives, get different looks, and see what works, because at the end of the day, you don't know until you actually shoot. So now here we actually changed locations, so we went to a different part. Every time you kind of see me out of my car, like grabbing stuff, that means I changed locations. We're driving around a bit, seeing the different cliff sides look like. Right here, I actually like this little area, and I think it does a pretty good job at, showcasing what this entire Los Angeles International Forest is kind of like. And here we're going to be adjusting the camera for a bit, and then taking another HDR, capturing the different types of lighting and whatnot. And I actually really like this photo a lot, so much to the point that I actually go ahead and edit it right here. And I think this photo actually does a lot. Like, what you're doing here is really showcasing the depth of the mountains themselves and the different types of just the ravine as a whole. I really like this one. The colors are very nice and soft, nothing too harsh, and it's just a nice, good photo. It's good, it just works. So kind of like I said earlier, we're gonna go ahead and changing this to a more vertical orientation just to see what the different looks are. Personally, for this location, I think horizontal actually works better, just because of how the actual ravine is structured, how the mountains are structured, the lines that are converging. It makes sense just to shoot a lot of horizontal, but you just gotta test it and find out and see what works and what doesn't. So right here, we're actually doing something a little bit different. So we're going to be throwing the camera in horizontal orientation. And this is an amazing thing about telephotos, is that you can actually get panorama photos. We're actually shooting a bunch of photos either vertically or horizontally, and then throwing them together in Lightroom to get a finished panorama product. Now what this helps do is actually create a different type of aspect ratio that you wouldn't normally be able to get, and you actually get higher megapixel photos, and honestly it just looks really cool, and you get different kind of compression and all that good stuff. So this is the photo without cropping it, because it's kind of a mess. You kind of do want to crop it, add some edits in, which is what we do right here. So right here, we gave it a nice crop, and then we went ahead and edited it. This photo actually came out to 71 megapixels, which is absolutely insane for, the 24 megapixel camera. It's just absolutely insane and mind-blowing how nice the actual image quality is. And man, 71 megapixels from a 24 megapixel sensor is just absolutely unreal. Okay. And the best thing about the 24-200 is the fact that you can actually shoot panoramas at 50 millimeters, at 70 millimeters, and get amazing photos. You're gonna take the same photo that you would have if you just zoomed in, but now you get the addition of megapixels. And because you're shooting with a telephoto, you're actually gonna be able to shoot mountains and things like that aren't necessarily moving. So panoramas and HDR definitely works a lot better for this. So you can be very creative with something like a 24-200 and get different results, and just work your magic with photography and get what you need out of the actual landscape itself. Here we're gonna be shooting another HDR in the vertical orientation. I just want to give you guys kind of a look of like what I was shooting that day and so on. So yeah, that is one of the photos, and we keep moving on here. So here, what we are doing is just adjusting the camera, seeing what the different focal lengths are going to be doing. And what I'm actually doing here is going down to 24 millimeters and shooting those photos and kind of just seeing what that actually looks like, how the image is. And this is the final edited product. I actually like this photo. If it wasn't for the kind of blue line on top, I tried so many different ways to get rid of it, but it's just there. Just gonna have to deal with it. But overall, the colors are really nice. The light's very nice. I just wish the sky was a bit more on the purple side. We got different colors there, but overall, I think it's a good photo. So that is pretty much all the photos I took. I took more, but you don't want to be too long when it comes to these videos, especially since this POV part isn't a major aspect. But These are the two photos that I really liked. So it's pretty much both the same photo, just one is the panorama, and this one right here, I think these are great photos, and being able to get 71 megapixel images out of 24 megapixel sensor is incredible, and it's all due to this 24-200. So yeah, guys, that is it for the POV portion. Let me know what you think about the photos down in the comment section down below, and let's get right back to the video. Alright, y'all, so we just finished shooting. We got some pretty good photos. Used strictly my 24-200, and I actually really, I like that lens. That lens is pretty sweet. So what we're doing is we're probably gonna get some food, and then after, I'm gonna go ahead and look at the photos, edit them, and all that good stuff, so I really understand and know how the image quality is from that actual lens. I'm giving you my real first impressions right after the shoot. So let's head back to my place, look at the photos, and do the real first impressions.
Chili cheese fries first?
Chili cheese fries first, always. Alright, y'all, we are now back at the studio, and it's time to give my true first impressions of the 24-200 for landscape photography. Just finished shooting, just finished editing the photos, and overall, it's a pretty good lens for landscape photography. I really liked it. But let's jump into the ergonomics of this thing. First of all, something I did not really care for, there is no AF/MF switch on here, which I find pretty necessary for the way I shoot when it comes to also doing video and switch between landscape photography. When I'm shooting landscapes, I always use manual focus and never autofocus because you want to be as pinpoint accurate as possible. And when I'm shooting video, I'm definitely shooting autofocus because I don't want to have to change, manual focus and stuff. So switching between the two, you want to have that manual focus autofocus switch rather than just go into the settings, because I just feel like it's a lot more fluid in the way you shoot, and you don't have to really worry about, different things and settings and so on. So really wish they had an AF/MS switch. Another thing I'm really not a big fan of is the fact that this is kind of like a plasticky sort of lens, because the mount is actually metal, which I think actually adds a lot of value to this lens, because a 50-250 definitely was not metal by any means. It was all plastic, and it definitely made it feel a lot cheaper. This doesn't feel as cheap, but it's all plastic. Really wish there was a little bit of metal, especially on this part right here. So let's switch to the good stuff about this lens. First of all, the overall handling of this lens is really nice. It's around the same size as my Nikon 50-250 plus Z6. This entire setup is around that same size, but it is slightly heavier, and that's something you have to expect when going to a full frame system. It's just going to be slightly heavier, but in the grand scheme of things, with how much weight I'm carrying on my back in the first place, I don't think it's really going to matter nearly as much. It's going to be borderline negligible, so that is something good to know. And kind of the last thing I really like about this lens is that there's a locking mechanism right here. So when it's locked, it's just going to stay at 24 millimeters, and it's not going to move around. And that's kind of important to me when I'm actually traveling with it, so I don't feel like I have to worry about this thing moving around my bag and stuff. It just kind of stays in place. I don't have to worry about it shifting and whatnot. So overall, the size and the weight and how it feels in the hands is perfectly fine for landscape photography. You don't want something too big, too bulky for a telephoto lens, and this pretty much fits the bill in terms of what you want in a lightweight telephoto. Now let's talk about the zoom range, because I think the zoom range is extremely important, especially when talking about a lens like this that's a 24-200. First of all, I actually use a 24-200 range a lot more than I thought I did. And it's kind of cool having actually the 24 millimeters on the wide end, because sometimes you just want to take a quick photo with this setup right here instead of having to go and switch lenses and stuff. It's really useful actually. I've been a big proponent of not using 24-70s for landscape photography. To me, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you don't really use that standard range that much to warrant using that lens in particular. You would use it maybe like 5% of the time, but it was nice having those options, especially slightly wider than 70 millimeters, because when I'm shooting landscape photography, especially with my 70-300s, I always felt there's a little bit of a limit, especially at that wide end, and this allows me to push a little bit further back from that. And especially when I'm shooting panoramas, that's really helpful, because now I can get a wider field of view and I'm able to get those higher megapixel counts, and I think that's really important. And now let's talk about the 200 millimeter at the long end. I remember when I was actually making the first impressions up in the mountains, I said that 200 millimeters, that is maybe my biggest concern for this lens. Is 200 millimeters enough for landscape photography? And the best way I want to put it is that it did not inhibit me from actually creating the photos that I wanted to create. I really felt like I was able to get the photos that I wanted, and I didn't feel like I needed 300 millimeters. There were times where I wanted to go past to that 300 millimeters, but at the end of the day, when actually creating the photos, I did not need the 300 millimeters nearly as much as I thought. And now this is definitely a question that cannot be answered truly in just one shoot. This is something that is going to be evolving over time. you know, in the long run, if I really feel like I miss that 300mm, I might have to switch back to more like a 70-300. But for now, in the shoot that I was on, you know, I really did not feel like I needed that 300mm. Of course, I did miss it sometimes, but overall, I was able to get the shots I did, and that is the most important thing at the end of the day. So we will see what happens with this lens, but I think it should be okay for what I need. And I really like this lens a lot, especially having the 24-200 range. I think it's a solid range, so we will see how this holds up in the long run. So now let's talk about image quality. And overall image quality for this lens is very good. Obviously, it is a Nikon Z lens. I did not feel like it lacked in contrast and colors and all that type of stuff. And you know, one thing I did slightly notice when I was, you know, throwing the photos into Lightroom and looking at them was that there was slight chromatic aberration when I started editing them. But once I started getting into it, it kind of went away. It was only when I was really pixel peeping, and I was shooting a very high contrast situation. So I'm not sure how much of an issue that's going to be. At the end of the day, the end product, end photos that it created were perfectly fine. So I don't really feel like it's going to be that big of an issue. That's just something that I kind of noticed. But again, I was shooting very high contrast situations. In terms of sharpness, it's very good. I was able to shoot 71 megapixel photos on this Nikon Z6 because I was shooting panoramas, and they were very sharp. So definitely no complaints on that end either. And you know, I love the full frame quality that this is able to give me, because when I'm shooting with a Nikon Z6 and this 24-200, it's definitely a different feeling, different look than my Nikon, you know, Z50 with the 50-250. Really loving the image quality a lot, and that's the entire reason why I'm even moving to this setup in the first place. I love the image quality out of it, and the photos just come out great and look good. That is pretty much my entire first impressions of this lens. Overall, it's a really solid lens, great image quality, very good ergonomics. Just wish it had that AF switch, but you know, there's nothing you could really do about that. And the biggest question, of course, is 200mm going to be enough for landscape photography in the long run? That is the biggest question we'll be definitely asking in the long run. But for now, it works, and if I have any more, you know, sort of complaints about the 200mm, you will definitely be the first ones to hear. Anyways, guys, if you are at all interested in this lens, go ahead and check the description box below. There's a link to actually purchase the lens. It is an affiliate link, so I will get a commission off it. It will greatly help my channel, but in no way, shape, or form does it affect my, you know, honesty about making these reviews. There is no bias involved and so on. I'm still gonna be reviewing it as, you know, honestly as I can. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for experiencing the world with me.